Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this very special lecture. My name is Helen Sullivan. I'm the Dean of the College of Asia and the Pacific, and it is my very great pleasure to welcome you here. As we begin, I would like to begin by acknowledging and celebrating the first Australians on whose traditional lands we meet, the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples present here today. I'd also like to acknowledge that that land was never ceded. I'm delighted to welcome you here to this evening's public lecture on the double black box, national security, AI, and the struggle for democratic accountability. This lecture is part of a broader research project within the college on anticipating the future of war, AI, automated systems, and resort to force decision-making, led by my very good colleague, Professor Tony Erskine from the ANU Bell School. Over the next 3 days, Tony Erskine and Professor Stephen Miller from the Balfour Center at Harvard University will co-convene a research workshop as part of this project, followed by a policy roundtable involving senior government officials. And that's how we like to do things here in the college. We like to do rigorous research, and we also like to engage actively with the public servants, with politicians, with not-for-profit organisations, and indeed anybody who is interested in informed discussion and debate. Now, I'm told that we've had workshop participants arrive in Canberra from all over the world today and over the weekend, and I'd like to welcome you all to the ANU and apologise for the weather, particularly for those of you who've come from places that may have been warm. It's not been warm here for a little while, but you're very welcome to stay until it does get warm. That might take you up until, I don't know, November. And among those who've arrived, of course, is our distinguished keynote speaker this evening, Professor Ashley Deeks. Professor Deeks is the class of 1948 scholarly research professor at the University of Virginia Law School. Her primary research and teaching interests are in international law, national security, intelligence, and the application of new technologies to those fields. She writes about the use of force, executive power, government secrecy, and the intersection of national security and AI. She recently served as Special Assistant to the President, Associate White House Counsel, and Deputy Legal Advisor to the National Security Council. Moreover, before joining UVA, she served for 10 years in the US State Department's Office of the Legal Advisor, including as the Embassy Legal Advisor to the US Embassy in Baghdad during Iraq's constitutional negotiations. This is a crucial time to be discussing the challenges of AI, as AI-enabled technologies infiltrate every aspect of our lives, and there could not be a more high-stakes context in which to consider this transformation than national security decision-making. Professor Deeks is going to speak for about half an hour, and then Tony will moderate a Q&A, and I am sure that Professor Deeks, who is incredibly well equipped to talk about all sorts of things, will also be keen to hear your views about what's been going on in the United States since she left. I can't think of a more qualified scholar to help us think through the issues involved in AI and national security decision-making than Professor Deeks. And I now open the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Dean Sullivan. Thanks to ANU and thanks to Tony in particular for having me present this afternoon, and thanks to you all for coming to listen, and I look forward to your questions when I'm done. In terms of the weather, I have to say this feels great. Washington, D.C. is about 34 degrees Celsius, so this is a very refreshing time for me to come visit. So I want to talk to you today about a legal and policy challenge that is getting closer to hand every day, and indeed for countries like the US and for Australia, I think it has already basically arrived. And this is a problem that I refer to as the double black box. The problem manifests itself at the intersection of national security law, AI, and the struggle that we encounter when we try to hold our government institutions accountable when they operate in secret. In particular, I'm talking about the ever-increasing role of AI in our national security operations. Since 2021 or so, we have seen an exponential focus in the news, and at least for the United States, in our Congress, about public uses of AI by governments, by companies, by individuals. And I think it's a good development that our legislators are becoming more savvy about AI. But I want to focus on a different set of uses of AI today. And that's those uses that are taking place behind the veil of classification. Our national security agencies, which operate in what I would call a national security black box, today will increasingly use tools that are fairly described as an algorithmic black box. So today I want to explain why each black box alone, and especially both together, challenge our ability to ensure that our governments are only doing things that comport with our public law values. I will offer a few thoughts about how different actors can help ensure that our governments only deploy AI that is lawful and effective and accountable, even within the double black box. And with apologies, I will mostly use the United States to illustrate my points, recognizing that allies like Australia have both similarities and differences in their governmental structures. But hopefully there are enough similarities that my points will resonate with those from democracies that worry about unsupervised government power. And I will conclude with a few thoughts about why robust international regulation in this space is not actually likely to do all that much to mitigate the double black box. So let me start out by describing what I mean by the national security black box. In the United States and in many other states, the government makes national security decisions in secret. This is true most obviously for operations that come out of the Defense Department, for intelligence agencies, but it's also true for ministries of defense, foreign affairs, homeland security. These actors are using sensitive intelligence to guide their decisions. Their governments they're using sensitive technologies to collect information, and the governments need to keep their intelligence and their technologies and their operations secret from adversaries in order for them to be effective. But that also means that even democratic governments have to keep them secret from their own publics. That, of course, makes it hard to oversee the executive branch. So we can say that our national security agencies are operating inside a national security black box. So why is that a concern? Why do we care about that? When we bemoan government secrecy, I think what we're really worried about is whether the government is complying with our public law values. And by public law values, I mean that government officials are adopting policies and undertaking operations that are legal, that are done in a way that is efficient and effective, that they're required to justify their decisions to some other actor, and that they're done in a manner that allows us to hold decision makers accountable for bad choices that they may make. This is not, I should be clear, an argument that executive officials act with bad intent or incompetence as a matter of course. I don't think they do. But history is rife with examples where governments have drifted off course. Secrecy can facilitate sloppiness, it can facilitate groupthink, other confounding habits. And I think we have to assume that national security officials suffer from the same cognitive biases that we all experience, which can be heightened in operating environments that are infused with secrecy. So this is why we need some oversight over our secret government activities. But the nature of the national security black box makes that hard. In the US, the two primary traditional surrogates here, surrogates for us, the public, in overseeing the executive are, on the one hand, Congress, and on the other hand, the courts. But they are imperfect overseers at best. For us, Congress's Intelligence and Armed Services Committees provide some oversight over the military, over our intelligence community, but the members of Congress can only know what the executive tells them. They and their staffers often have less expertise than executive officials, and they have limited staffing to oversee a very large executive branch, a very large national security bureaucracy. So there are a number of structural challenges that Congress faces. And I think the US is not alone here. In 2023, it seems like Australia's parliament urged the creation of a new joint statutory defense committee that could receive classified information and improve oversight over decisions to send the Australian military into war. What about our courts? Our courts provide only limited oversight in the national security space. They have to wait for cases. They can't go out and seek out problems. They have to wait for people to file cases. And when they do hear cases, they generally accord the executive significant deference in the national security space. There are some other, I think, less appreciated actors who can help check our national security executive, though. None of them is perfect, none is comprehensive, but they can sometimes see behind the curtain of secrecy, and they have some leverage over the executive. First, think about foreign allies. They can impose constraints on the executive in the US when the US and an ally are engaged in classified joint operations. They can impose an additional layer of legal restraint because they need to follow their own domestic laws. They may have different interpretations of international law than the United States does, which both sides will need to reconcile over the course of the operation. And they can call out the US or resist if the US officials are doing something that they perceive as unlawful or improper. We also have executive branch lawyers. So we know, for example, that there is what we call an interagency lawyers group that reviews draft covert action findings before the president decides to sign them. These interagency negotiations and this competition among lawyers from different agencies in our government serve, I think, as a very important check behind the veil of secrecy. They argue, they debate, they demand reasons from each other with the hope of improving their analysis. We also have actors like technology companies. I think this is especially true in the cyber setting, that technology companies can actually serve as a check. Think about companies like Microsoft that are gathering what is basically intelligence, identifying which actors are engaged in hostile cyber operations, for instance. They will share their intelligence with the government, and the government will often share its intelligence with them. And the companies can test the quality of the intelligence that the government is providing to them. We also have in the US, and I know Australia has a federalist system as well, US states and localities. These are actors, government actors, who work with our federal government on counterterrorism, on election threats, on cyber threats, and our states may question legal bases for federal approaches. And to date, US states have moved more quickly than the federal government in regulating AI tools, including facial recognition software. So to sum up, there's lots of significant US national security activities happening every day, but the secret nature of it makes it hard to assess when the executive is complying with our public law values. There are various types of checks on the executive, but each of them is impartial at best. So I now want to turn to the AI black box, right? So into the national security black box, we are introducing artificial intelligence. Advanced AI tools, deep neural nets, I'm sure most of you know what those systems are. can produce increasingly accurate predictions and recommendations. But it is very hard for people to know how and why those algorithms made those predictions or determinations. And somewhat notoriously, these advanced algorithms have often been referred to as black boxes. And unlike traditional military tools, like, for example, long-range missiles, which generally do as they're programmed, the systems that we're talking about can be built to learn on their own. Militaries and intelligence agencies have started to use AI in their operations. Militaries need to make predictions and detect anomalies, including during armed conflict. They need to figure out who is dangerous. Should we detain this person? Should we target him? When and where should we go out on patrol today? What is the adversary likely to do next? Those are all questions that invite prediction. I think we'll also see AI in counterintelligence operations. So our CIA, for example, and our Justice Department might use advanced machine learning to try to determine, based on patterns of life, who suspected spies are inside the US and arrest them. Often those will be foreigners, but they could also be American citizens. We're seeing AI in the cyber setting, right? Discussions about cyber autonomy, where you have autonomous cyber tools that can hunt out vulnerabilities in the government's own systems and the systems of adversaries. I think AI in cyber is going to be quite attractive because the US and its allies are going to need a lot of speed in response to incoming cyber attacks, which happen very, very quickly. But a clash of cyber tools could escalate into a full-blown conflict accidentally. Further, we have things like lethal autonomous weapons systems that some now use the acronym LAWS to describe. States are already using loitering munitions that can be launched, told to find a given target within a wide area, and basically dive bomb it without checking back in. And I think developments that we have seen in the Russia-Ukraine conflict reflect the front edge of this frontier. We also have our own Deputy Secretary of Defense, Kathleen Hicks, giving a speech about vast AI fleets, basically referring to autonomous drones and so on. I think that concept kind of brings this home. Okay, so where does this leave us? This is where I turn to the double black box. If we are already worried about our government doing things in secret that are hard for us as citizens to know about and to evaluate, what happens when national security decision makers begin to use tools that we and they may not be able to interpret or understand very well? Actors who are already operating outside of the public eye will make decisions that are deeply informed by AI. Or in some cases, the AI systems themselves may even be the decision makers. So we might say that in today's national security space, we are ending up with a double black box. So first, in terms of legality, the difficulties we have today in identifying unlawful executive branch activity will be amplified by the challenges of understanding whether a particular AI tool complies with the law. Second, effectiveness. My second public law value. The difficulty in obtaining enough information to evaluate whether particular national security choices are optimal is going to be compounded by the difficulty in understanding the quality of AI recommendations and predictions that are informing those choices. Third, on accountability, the difficulty in deciding who is responsible for an illegal or an ill-advised policy choice will be amplified by the challenge of determining who is responsible for significant algorithmic errors. And fourth, in terms of the need to justify decisions, the ease with which with which the executive can avoid defending its national security decisions due to classification will be amplified by the non-transparency and sometimes the inexplicability of AI algorithms. So how can democratic publics be confident they should trust both the systems and the people relying on the systems to act responsibly in our names? I think these difficult national security questions will become even harder when the questions implicate AI tools. And yet, there will be pressure on national security officials to do more with AI because Russia and China are aggressively pursuing these tools. There are important reports in the US from high-profile commissions, such as the National Security Commission on AI, that worry explicitly about the US falling behind and urge more progress faster. And yet, even today, when some of the US government's machine learning systems have come to light, US citizens have pushed back, have said that they are not comfortable with those tools. Okay, so that's the problem. How do we address the double black box? So let me preface this by saying all of this is not to say that we should not introduce AI into our national security ecosystem. It is to counsel that as we do so, we need a healthy set of checks. I'll mention a few specific examples of roles that I think both our traditional and non-traditional secrecy surrogates can play to help manage the double black box problem. But there is definitely more to say here, so please consider these examples illustrative, not exhaustive. Okay, so how about our traditional surrogates? Well, this is not the first time that the US as a society is confronting significant challenges in trying to ensure that the US government's activities behind the veil of secrecy comport with our public law values. As some of you may know, the 1970s, Watergate, FBI, opening mail, there was a very long list of nefarious activities, many captured by the Church Committee report, that led to a number of statutory reforms that have made a significant difference in our approach to intelligence. Indeed, I have argued that we should consider drawing inspiration from a range of existing statutes and processes, many of which enable our traditional surrogates to check the national security executive. So first, consider what Congress could do. So in the US, partly as a result of the 1970s problems, we have several important framework statutes that regulate risky or controversial national security activities. We have a statute that regulates covert action. We have a statute that regulates foreign intelligence surveillance. And the statutes give Congress a window into secret and sensitive executive actions that might lead to foreign policy crises, or actions that might intrude deeply on US citizens' rights. I think Congress could use those statutes as models for a new statute that would require the president to sign off on high-risk uses of national security AI, acting on recommendations from a range of national security agencies and their lawyers. And they could require the president, Congress could require the president to notify Congress of those approvals and keep them informed of the outcomes of the use of these tools. Second, let's think about how the executive itself could self-regulate. If it wanted to ensure that the right mix of executive agencies, lawyers, policymakers, and operators were involved in decisions to develop and deploy high-risk AI, the US could use as a model the executive's internal interagency decision-making processes that currently exist for authorizing acts like targeted killings or offensive cyber operations. If we want to make sure that the US public would support the tools that the government ultimately chooses to use, we could even consider collecting classified sentiment question about different AI tools. That is, the executive could ask people with appropriate clearances and a basic understanding of AI their views on different hypothetical uses of AI systems, where they could serve as an informed stand-in for the general public, which, as I flagged earlier, can't be told about the specifics of government capabilities. So those are just a few ideas about what traditional surrogates could do. How about non-traditional surrogates? These are, again, actors like foreign allies, technology companies, and US states and localities. Let's consider foreign allies. So thinking about foreign governments as surrogates for the US polity in relation to secret government operations may seem counterintuitive. But allies often have incentives to prod the US to adhere to its own public law values. And they have leverage over the executive. They can share or withhold intelligence. They can share or grant consent to use their territory or their airspace or their cyber infrastructure. They benefit when in joint operations, the US executive is acting competently and legally. So how does that translate into ensuring that the US use of national security AI complies with public law values? Well, working out how AI or autonomous systems can comply with the laws of armed conflict, for example, is a complicated legal and technical issue, one that discussions between peer militaries might elucidate. Further, an ally could refuse to cooperate with the US military if US AI systems violate legal norms, or if the systems are so opaque that an ally can't be confident that the system is law compliant. Allies can serve as a check on the quality and effectiveness of US national security AI systems by refusing to cooperate with the US if they're concerned that the systems are technologically or morally unsound. And the same thing is true in reverse for states other than the US, which have alliances and allies who hopefully seek to comply with their own public law values. Finally, I think we should I would urge governments to consider being radically transparent about national security AI. Democratic governments should publicly address the fact that these new tools pose difficult challenges and trade-offs. They should give reasons why they are using these tools. And they should clarify how the tools are going to be used, by whom, and pursuant to what legal rules. So to be clear, this is not to argue for the release of the algorithms themselves. But I think we in the US learned post 9/11 that taking things into deep secrecy for an extended period of time can ultimately prove unproductive. I think the Defense Department in the US and the intelligence community have started to do good work here, putting out codes of ethics, but it's done at a very high level of generality. And so I think we need to get down deeper into the specifics. Okay, so those are some potential ways to start to address the double black box problem. What about international regulation? Having recognized the challenge of the double black box, one might wonder whether there is a role for international agreements that could effectively reduce the size of the double black box. That is, if states were to agree to take certain uses of national security AI off the table, that might mean a smaller double black box for all of us to worry about domestically. While I think there is some work to be done on the international plane, I also think it's important not to overstate how successful it will be. As I started to research the possibilities of international regulation, one striking thing for me was how often writers invoked nuclear arms control as the best analogy to possible international regulation of national security AI. And the argument goes like this. If the Soviet Union and the US could reach agreement about this most powerful of weapons, that is, nuclear weapons, well, surely they and other states will be able to reach agreement about national security AI tools. But I think that argument is actually misplaced for a number of reasons. Another striking thing was the breadth and the breadth of these proposals and the lack of detail in the proposals about how to regulate national security AI. Because I think they ignored the very difficult political relationship right now between the US and China, the US and Russia, and ignored different approaches to international law and international law compliance. In a different setting, though, I had written about how international cyber regulation has transpired, and I put regulation in quotes deliberately. I think that process has drawn on different buckets of tools to shape norms and to condemn pernicious cyber acts. But not all of that, and in fact, mostly has not occurred through international agreements, that is, treaties. And we have seen modest, non-linear progress on developing cyber norms. And I think the same bin of tools that we have seen applied to try to manage offensive hostile cyber operations will do a lot of the same work in the national security AI space, especially because cyber and AI share a number of structural similarities. I'm happy to say more about that in questions. And I think in some places, as I've indicated, cyber and AI are going to actually merge. So I'll just run through a quick bucket of tools. I think states will basically agree to apply existing international law to national security AI, where debates will linger about how to interpret some of those rules. I think we have already started to see states develop some new but pretty vague norms among a wide group of states. We've seen this in the UN group of government experts. We've seen this in the CCW, the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons. I think we will see work in unilateral coalitions to develop more specific norms and work through some of these challenges privately. By that I mean NATO, the Five Eyes, and AUKUS. I think states will start making unilateral statements of law and policy, what they see the law to be, what they see the proper rules to be. I think states will potentially impose sanctions on bad AI actors, and they might even try to use criminal law on the margins. But I think getting the analogy right and understanding the possibilities and limits of international regulation of AI helps us think about where to focus our efforts and where not to focus our efforts. I think our allies here can be really useful in helping the US and helping each other think through the costs and benefits of using certain types of national security AI, and joining together to condemn unacceptable uses of national security AI by others. Maybe there are small areas where the US could reach bilateral agreement with adversaries to take certain very narrow uses of AI off the table. And here I'm thinking about AI in nuclear command and control. But the challenges of reaching substantive multilateral AI regulation shows for me the importance of getting our own checks and balances right on the domestic side. So let me wrap up. We currently face the challenge posed by the double black box. There is no one silver bullet to address the double black box challenge. We are going to need to look to both our traditional and our non-traditional overseers, legislatures, courts, executive lawyers, allies, tech companies, whistleblowers, and leakers. All of these actors have some access to classified information, programs, technology, and threats, and they can help us enforce our public law values. As a lawyer, I think it is critical to ensure early legal input on whether to use AI at all in a given context, and what kinds of data and parameters and factors algorithms should contain or avoid. And the public itself needs to signal to democratic governments what kinds of national security AI tools we support and which we want our governments to avoid. So in short, I think we have a big, important, challenging job ahead of us. Thanks.